Hello, everyone. My name is Paul Loberti with the Rhode Island Executive Office of Health and Human Services. I'm the director of the HIV Provision of Care and Special Populations Unit at the Executive Office, and I'm also the director of the Ryan White Program. As you know, the Ryan White Program is a program that's funded by HRSA from the Federal Department of Health and Human Services. And for over 28 years, the state of Rhode Island has been offering up a variety of different Ryan White services to people living with HIV and AIDS in the state. I'm so proud to be endorsing this series on healthy aging and HIV. This very unique series is being sponsored again by the Executive Office, the Rhode Island Consumer Advisory Board, John Snow International, Age Friendly Rhode Island, and Rhode Island College. With sponsors like these, I think you'll agree that we can't go wrong in some of the topics that we've selected. And the speaker for today's presentation will be someone that is familiar to many, many consumers in the state of Rhode Island. She has a long career in HIV, well over 30 years in the field, and started at the Rhode Island Department of Health as an assistant administrator for the Office of Communicable Diseases, where HIV was a significant part of her work. She has done many things in her career, but now she's facilitating the Rhode Island Consumer Advisory Board. And there she brings forth a series of many, many, many different training, health education programs for our consumers living with HIV in the state. What you don't know is she's also an expert in human sexuality. So we thought this would be a perfect opportunity for her to come back and give us a training on human sexuality and aging. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Lucille Menudo, who is also a clinician and has a master's in education. So as a nurse, she will be able to answer questions and also provide opportunities for people to think about some of the completely unique elements that she'll be bringing forth today. Hi, Lucille.
Hello, Paul. Let me just say there's no such thing as an expert in sexuality. Maybe Dr. Ruth, but that's about it. But I'm glad to be here. I do have a long history, including teaching human sexuality at a college for over 30 years. So it's been a pleasure to be able to do this with you. Can I have the next slide, please? Before we could begin, there's just like 3 questions that I would like folks to think about. One is think about how comfortable you are with talking about sex. I'm very comfortable doing it, but I've been doing it for 30 odd years. So I've had a long history of doing it with a lot of different populations and many iterations. It's like, I always learn something new from my students, but I also know that there's always something new to learn. And the other thing that you want to think about is, what if your discussion, or what if there's no discussion or something that I say that might challenge some long-held beliefs that you have about aging or sexual orientation and or gender roles, because there's a lot going on where people are much more comfortable talking about these issues, and you're seeing much more of it in the media. Lastly, and most important of all, is if you have been a victim of sexual trauma, you need to keep safe. And that's the most important thing. And so if anything in this presentation makes you uncomfortable, you need to protect yourself and do what's going to help you either discontinue it or continue it with some, new thinking about it. If the most important thing is keeping safe, you don't want to jeopardize any kind of sobriety or any kind of or reinitiate any kind of victim trauma. Okay, so if you're clear on these 3 things, we can go on to the next slide. What you can expect from this session: there will be 5 sessions. They're about 15 to 20 minutes long. And the topics include human sexuality. What is it? It's way more than sex. And a lot of people just confuse human sexuality and they think it's all about sex, but actually it's about a lot of things, including what we consider love and intimacy for people who are interested in long-term commitments, what makes a good sex life, for both people who are in long-term commitments and or people who are hooking up. It's who have a casual relationship with their sexual partners. And also, what kind of needs do people who are aging have? We all have a need and a desire for touch and for love, but what makes it a good experience for us? And that's both, again, in long-term relationships and hooking up. If you're in a long-term relationship, how do you keep that going? What keeps a couple going in a relationship? How do you communicate? And lastly, getting beyond the past. What do you need to do to get past some of those things that may have happened to you in the past? And I'll give you a few tips, but we'll get into more details when we get around to the 5th session. Next slide, please. When you're thinking about human sexuality, there's no clear path to this. It's very much affected by popular culture. In our culture, we both encourage and discourage sexuality. If you look at the polarization of the country, you'll see that where people are very much want to have human issues around abortion, issues around premarital sex, who's gay, who's straight, sexual and identity, gender identity. All of these things are issues that are out there all of the time. And we've also become much more public in recognizing adults who are creating sexual trauma for children. So there's a lot going on in our culture. There is what is normal and natural sexual behavior varies through time and from culture to culture. There are some cultures that do not kiss. In our culture, we kiss. There needs to be an understanding that in diversity is really important in understanding what is normal and natural sexual behavior. There really is no such thing as normal or natural sexual behavior. There's a lot of diversity. There always has been. If you're hearing about that diversity now, it's because we have become more open about talking about it and because of the effect of the media on all of these things. And just keep in mind that our culture, how we're raised, what our grandparents told us, what our parents told us, is strongly affected our understanding of sexual behavior. Next session. Next slide. Just think about the impact of television. I'm old enough to remember when we got our first television, and it was a Long Ranger on TV. And there were things like Fred Astaire movies and Ginger Rogers dancing across the screen. And that became what was romantic to me. And today, what children see is something very different. And the influence of television and the media has been huge on children. Even very young children know all the words to the music videos today. A lot of the depictions of sexuality in the media tend to be very unrealistic, starting with body size. It's only recently that women who are who have a little bit more weight on them, that are more normal looking, are actually appearing in videos and having leadership roles and saying this is all good, that a woman's body is good no matter what it looks like. This has been very new. It's always been you had to be reed thin, you had to look like a model with perfect hair, and that has affected a lot of women in what they think is supposed to be, and a lot of young men too, and what they think they should be expecting. We also, you'll see it in men. Like men's body need to be ripped. You need to be able to show your abs. That's been an influence as well. 2/3 of primetime program contains some kind of sexual content, and they rarely talk about the risks of things like a sexual transmitted infection or the possibility of pregnancy. It's usually, bells and whistles and fireworks and wonderful things are happening, and we're in love or it was great sex, but they don't really talk about the possibility of risk. And that's pretty typical of what goes on in both media, television, and music videos. Next one. Next slide, please. Music videos are made to appeal to the eye and the ear. Like they are flashy. They have all these sexualized images to maintain our interest. and the sexual images used to sell songs. We've seen sexuality used to sell cars and cigarettes. When the cigarettes were in the media, it's been used in a lot of different ways. They also tend to promote sexual stereotypes around gender roles. So like women are supposed to act this way, men are supposed to act that way. And in some places, these videos, music videos and video games are very sexist and violent, and especially against women. So that like if you got grandchildren, you might want to take a look at and see what some of them are actually looking at. The next one. Next slide. When we think of some of the terms associated with human sexuality, sexual orientation always comes up. And this is a pattern of sexual and emotional attachments that we have based on one's the gender of one's personal desire. For instance, if it's the opposite gender, we call that heterosexuality. We tend to be heterosexual environment and culture. A lot of things are based on, men and women as sexual partners. I think if you look at some of the children's play and you ask your little grandchild, if they've got a friend at school and in kindergarten, as young as kindergarten, do you have a boyfriend or a girlfriend? Many times it's based on a heterosexual notion that they would have a girlfriend or a boyfriend that's opposite gender to them. Homosexuality refers to the same gender. So someone who's homosexual actually has a desire for sexual partners who are the same as they are in terms of sexual and gender. And bisexual are folks who will have a preference for either gender. So you'll see it. There's straight, there's gay, and there's bi. And there are people who now talk about being any or all of those. Want to change? Oh, where's the rest of it? There it is. When we talk about sex and gender, people confuse gender and sex. Sex is really is what you are biologically. There's male biological, female biological, and there are some people who are born with ambiguous genitalia, or they have characteristics of both male and female. They're intersex. This is a physical characteristics at all, and they could be, it could be a chromosomal thing, it could be an anatomy thing, but they tend to. That's a biological happening. Cis is a term that comes around now, CIS, and that refers to that your notion of who you are gender-wise as a person, your gender identity, is consistent with your sex. So your female sex and your female and your thoughts about what you think your gender identity is. Gender is very much a social and cultural characteristic that informs us about whether or not we're men and women. If you think about it, think about when a child is born, what's the first question we ask? Is it a boy or a girl? It's become so important about that gender that they now have big gender reveal parties, especially since we've been able to identify what the gender is of the baby through sonograms. It's become a big deal about knowing whether or not it's a boy or a girl. And people tend to treat their children accordingly after they're born based on whether they're a boy or a girl. And this is just a way of maintaining our social and cultural ideas and beliefs and passing them on to our children. Good or bad, doesn't matter. It's just that they may be challenged sometime in the future. Gender identity, this is the gender that one believes oneself to be. And this is the one that's been the most challenging recently for folks with it, because where there's much more open about talking about this. These things have always been there. There's always been homosexuals, there's always been gay people, there's always been people who question their gender. and where their gender is not consistent with their biology. This has always been out there, but it's now more, people are feeling more that they have more capacity to be able to talk about it. But people are still being stigmatized because of it. This is, gender identity is what we believe ourselves to be. Next one. So why is all of this important? You don't know what's going to happen within your own family or around you. Things are changing all of the time. And so we're faced with, at our age, I'm in my 70s now, thinking about, well, what does all of this mean? And does it mean anything to me? Well, it would certainly mean something to me if I had a grandchild who came to me and said that they were having gender identity issues, or if they were gay. I have been working in the gay community for a long time, so it's fine with me. It's none of my business who people sleep with. And so but other people have a lot of issues around it. For instance, a gay teenager who lets his family know that he is gay, that could get him kicked out of his house. And there are like programs in the city that take in and help to support these youngsters, because they've been kicked out of their homes because they told their family they were gay. And that's probably the one thing that can still happen to a child, where they are totally, that it would be totally unacceptable in their family. And that's really unfortunate, because it's not a choice, it's not a preference, it is who they are, it is what they are. And it's not just a whim. It's something that's probably always been there. They've been aware of it for a very long time within their own life and have not been able to express it or tell people about it. And so what kind of grandparent do you want to be? What kind of person do you want to be? Or do you want to be a safe haven? Do you want to be an ally for children that you might come across in your travels, both in the family and in your community? Do you want to be able to support them? And also think about what people think about folks who are aging. We're not supposed to be sexual beings, we're old. That's totally untrue and unfair, but we know it's not true. And so this is a chance for you to think about all of those old beliefs that you've had that maybe don't quite fit in with what's currently going on in the world. So this is why it's important. We want to be current, we want to be informed. We learn new things all of the time. Think about your own life and how many new things you've had to learn. Just look at what computers have done for our lives. We're learning new information all of the time, and this is new information, could be new information for you about being willing to and being able to accept the diversity within our community, that's considered perfectly natural and normal. That all behaviors have always been there. It's just now we're able to talk about them more freely and more openly. That human sexuality is much more than sexual intercourse. It's how we think about ourselves as men and women, and it's how we behave as men and women.